Hey everybody. So I've done a little bit of work digging into some of the files. I want to go over just a how-to on a lot of different stuff and mostly looking at the data for this video. I've kind of mapped out a brief description and did a little bit of research on a couple pieces of the data tables. The data tables are what defines all the thralls, the NPCs, the UI, everything from top to bottom. And at the end, I'm going to do a quick modification to one of the UIs to add a compass. So let's get started. The very first thing we're going to do is I want to talk about the content browser and the structure of the project. So there is a bit of stuff going on here. Let's be a little bit frank. Some of it's borrowed, some of it's bought, but major sections, if we go in, we know that the cinematics are where we have, some of the movie and matinee sequences. So that's like your intros and stuff like that. The effects are where you have all of your animations, your big chunk of your materials for the decals and dust, snow, all of those effects. There's also a number of meshes for the same things. So outside of that, environments, you have a lot of the buildings and buildings. So you'll see things like the big towers and other stuff like that. There's also all of the sky, sand, building materials, just a ton of stuff. So let's keep going. Maps, I talked about briefly in the first video. This is going to be a bunch of test maps. There's a fun little one. Inside of here, there's a cartoon shader one, which is kind of fun, and I strongly suggest you go through and just open these. Here it is, the cell shader test. That's kind of fun. It's a cell shaded universe, and like I said last time, we're using the empty one from Marcos, almost empty. So that is our test bed. Mods is one of the folders we really care about because any changes, any additions, anything you do will be in this folder. So that is going to be anywhere you have changes, this is where you're going to want to put them. And it's always best to really just stick to your own folder. If you can avoid anything else, go for it. Systems, there's some UI, some thrall pieces, there's a bunch of logic inside of here. A lot of the components exist in here, which are sub pieces of others. And then, excuse me. So you also have the tools, which are going to be some subcomponents of UI elements, some debugging tools, things like that. The other major section is UI. UI is broken down into a few pieces. We'll get into data tables in a minute, but HUD, inventory, main menu. We have some. So framework is like the sub pieces that make everything up, buttons and basic views and grids and sliders and stuff like that. So that's a brief overview of the sections. Now I want to talk about the data tables because there's a lot of data-driven content in the game, and without understanding the data tables, you really can't understand all of the pieces that are happening. So one of the important bits that we have here is we have a data table filter. So if you go into content, I like to select on the left-hand side of the content browser, the content at the top. You click on filters right here next to the search box. Now, inside of miscellaneous, you have data table. This is great because it lists all of the data tables in the entire project. we can go through all of these and have quite a bit of pardon me, I wanted to get my thing to highlight. So I've got a little thing that highlights clicks so you guys can see it a little bit easier. So very first section, the crafting station name table. So this guy has a list of, so let's assume that you want to create a new crafting station. This is the very first step. You're going to need to put it in and give it an ID and also potentially an icon if you need it. And there's going to be more, but this is your basics. And you see all of the different altars and tannery and carpenter bench and all that stuff that you use. So this is the first place for it. Now, next piece is, so next data table we'll talk about is the DT attribute system. So this is basically the cost in points for each stat at that level. So when you're at level 1, each stat costs you 1 point. When you're at level 2, each stat costs you 2 points, and on and on and on. And these are basically arranged by each stat. So next up we have the experience system level. This is just a straight mapping of experience to level. Pardon my extra windows here. And next up, feats per level. It is exactly what it sounds like. Each level, you go up 1, 2, 3, 4. You get a certain number of feats as you reach that level. When you hit level 2, you get 1 feat point, and on and on and on. You can use those to purchase feats. Next up, the monster XP. This lists all of the monster types, which are not exact monsters, or excuse me, they're types of monsters. It doesn't list specific instances. And then you have the type, the difficulty, and the XP, and based on all that and based on your level, you'll get awarded a certain amount of experience points. Next up, we have the so I'm going to skip around because some of these are super obvious. Weapon break sound is exactly what it sounds like. It is the weapon name and the sound it plays. When it's obvious, I'm just going to skip over it. Or if you probably don't need it, I don't think a lot of us are going to be doing heavy-duty sound design. And if you are, well, there's only a couple tables you really need to worry about. So most of those would be in place replacements. Next up, die color table. This is kind of fun. It lists every die, and you can select the color and change it pretty easily. So next on the list, emotes data table. I didn't know there was a bicrom, so I kind of want to get in and try that. But it will have a different animation and skeleton and icon for each one of these, and the emotes in this game are pretty hilarious, actually. As we go on, the energy data table. This guy is just the min-max values for corruption and temperature. That's not really useful. I don't suspect you're going to be increasing that unless you change all of the numbers in the game. There's an energy event table. This gives you different trigger values for corruption right now. You can also set a GUI trigger to kick off one of those. This is essentially how much corruption and what type and which buff it applies to. So you could put in other events as well. But right now, corruption is the only energy event. The other energy event is death when you go across the magic line of no. So the equipment template data table, this guy lists all of the equipment, and this is going to be how, when you're spawning one of these, where for example, if they had a weapon in their hand, you'd put the item ID in main hand. If they had a shield, put the item ID for that in the offhand. helmet, torso, legs, and you kind of see for each type of this guy, Black Hand Weapon. He's a weapon guy. He has a weapon in his main hand, and he also has shield. And I think it'll pick randomly from one of these guys that's listed, so that way it gives us some variance. And then you can also set the durability values. So on down, let's see. I have notes that I'm going through. So we have the equipment variation table. I don't know exactly how this works. I suspect it gives you some variance when generating NPCs. This one I haven't dug into. Again, this, by the way, all of this is my suspicions and me looking at the code. None of it is really confirmed. Just like the die table though, so let's take a look over here. We have eye color selections and eye makeup color selections, and these are just like the other one where you can select colors and change the values, and it is just those pre-populated values when you're generating a new character. So we're going to skip past all these selection ones. Now this one is kind of fun. When you do things like the set, Mitra, and Crumb, or not Crumb, the other one, excuse me. When you do any of those recipes, some of them will grant you favor with your religion. This defines which religion. So you'll see in this case it's I think this one's set, this one's Mitra. Anyways, you can define which recipes will give you favor to which god. So when we look at the it's the recipe table that actually defines that. I want to reference it since we're already here. Recipes table. Recipes table, if we look at 50,001, set favor, that is the ones that give you favor. Yog, sorry, I forgot Yog, and Mitra. So let's keep going here. Next up is the feat table. If you want to add new feat that gives you a reward of recipes, let's say you've created a whole new tree of recipes, then you're going to need to know this table very well. So it will let you select the name, description, ID, and all that. But more importantly, it'll let you set the prerequisites for that. So if you have, you're building a jetpack, then you're going to need like technician or something, as an example. These things, hopefully those are at the end of the skill tree because you have to learn a lot to get to there. But point being, if you add those recipes, then they're going to have some prerequisite feats and you're going to have to build up. So this lets you define all that. It also gives you categories, how much the feat costs, the level requirement. And then you'll see in the first couple, you get Survivalist and Weaver right away. That's so you can make clothes and you can create a pickaxe. And we see that in the recipes that are rewarded. And this is not a random selection. It gives you all of these things when you level. That's why you get a whole bunch of recipes each time you take a certain feat. Next up is the feat tree table. I believe the feat tree table is actually not really used anymore. It seems to be a little bit outdated, but I could be wrong. So more selections, more color selections, and then finally a really, really important table, the item table. The item table is essentially everything in the game. It's all the items that you can hold in your inventory, I should say. So you have your description, your name, the class of item, whether it's weapon or tool. There's several types of weapons, so we see a bunch of different types. We also have what it looks like. You'll have kind of the actual mesh that's tied to, where it sits on you, what location it can be on. One-handed, the weapons type, any ammunition that it can have, like bow and arrow, it's going to have arrows. The tribouket will probably have giant rocks or boulders. So as we go through, we see things like encumbrance weight, which is something a lot of people want to modify, weights and balancing. Also, these two values, damage on light hit and damage on healthy hit, when something hits you, it's using these values to determine how hard it hits. There's currently a bug in this, so these may or may not work for you. So past that, you also have very important things like the reach. So you have several variables that define what direction you can hit. There's a cone, there's also a distance, there's also a chase distance. There's quite a bit of detail. Let's look at it right here. So you have cone angle, cone max distance, you have the harvest damage, the maximum reach, the max attack distance, and all of this is very important when you set up monsters. If you create a new monster, you want to make some changes, these will be very important to you, and you have to go through them one by one and kind of play test it and see where it's at. So that's the item table. Very important if you're playing with items at all that you get very familiar with it. And that is it for that table. So next we have the loot table resources. So this is another hot button item, which is, hey, I want to drop more of a thing, or I want to drop things more often, or different types of things. Let's take a quick example. We have the tree. Tree can gather, if you use a pickaxe, it'll gather wood plus bark. If you use a hatchet, it'll gather wood plus branches, for example. So in that case, we see generic resource and special resource. Depending on the tool, it'll return a different thing. It'll also return potentially a limited resource, and it'll say if you want to drop at least one. That means it always has to drop that particular something in certain cases. So this is pretty straightforward, I think. After this, we have mappings. And it is exactly what it sounds like. So the mappings table is essentially the mappings of the type of key to the action. So in combat, the interact key is used. The rapid fire interact key is hold to use. So it gives kind of a name to the common names of the actual key mappings. So I'm guessing you won't be messing with that too much unless you're doing something like, a controller remapping or something cool like that. But it could be helpful. So monster stat table. This lists every single monster, their health, their armor, the experience points, and the knockback defense. It'll also do the LED, which is very important. If you have some super detailed monster, you're definitely going to want to pop in the LEDs at a reasonable rate, depending on the type of monster. And this is also really going to heavily influence the performance of the app. So something to be careful with if you have if you're introducing new monsters that are high poly, that could be an issue. All right, so next up is the professional template. So there's a bunch of NPC dialogue and NPC list tables, and essentially these are just listings with the NPC, the behavior tree, and the loot table, and the controller. generally speaking, you may want to add these, but it's just going to be essentially add it, and we can kind of go over that on a later video of adding new monsters and things like that. Just be aware that it's there. We're going to skip a lot of these guys, and we're going to talk about the next up is the recipes table. Race descriptions. If you add new race, there's race template data as well, which lists all of the races and what their base stats are, and kind of whether they have heads and eyes and lips, and what their available options are. Oh, also very important mod that everyone really likes is these two, and I'll let you use your imagination. Also really important, this guy right here. I don't want to highlight it too much, but you know what they say: big nose, big tissues. All right, enough of my comedy routine. So, very important one. Something everybody's really going to want to dig into is the recipes table. This guy lists all the recipes. Everyone has a million things they want to add, I'm sure. So this is the place you're going to go. It has all the basics plus the type of recipe, the amount of time it takes to craft. A lot of folks I've seen already making mods to the time to craft, which is they do reductions or change one specific thing that's annoying them. The tier of craft, the amount of XP, the station that's needed. If you added a new station, let's say our technician again needs a soldering station, then we'd have to add our crafting station here. Any required fuel, the building module that has to be in, any ingredients. So you can put up to 4 ingredients. You can also have results from that. You can have 2 sets of results. And I don't know, the way they did this is a little bit weird. It's very specific, which means it must have been a balancing thing or just a mistake. I think this data probably should have been, an array of data or something, but it is what it is. So that's what you have. You have some limits here that I didn't expect. So that gets us all of our values for recipes. So let's close these guys real quick and move on to the next one. Let me check my notes here. The resource stat table. Resource stat table is if you're gathering a resource, which is stone, bark, wood, coal, etc., then you're going to need a certain type of tool, potentially, and it has to be a certain tier, and then this will tell you if you need a tool or not, and if so, whether it has to be tier exclusive. In other words, do you need a certain tier? Star metal, for example, you do. Aloe vera, cotton, you need specific stuff. So that is a nice way to see the mappings of those. Next we have the spawn data table. Spawn data table is when you have a NPC, it's going to have female. It's also going to have all of their thrall data. So think of this as an entry box for the thralls. You're going to have to put in, so this is set up so you have to have 4 tiers of each one, or at least if you have a 4-tier thrall, it has to have 4 entries in here. So we see in this case the archer, please don't make me say that, that archer has all 4 tiers, and who knows why, do not use. You also get the race template, and which gives basic weight, and you also have armor templates and some other good stuff. And then down in the end, we also have the class, the behavior tree. Behavior tree, there's only 3 or so, which is like archer, attacker, and entertainer or something. and we'll look at more of those in a minute. The AI controller and the behavior parameters, and then finally the loot table. So there's a lot of stuff defining the thrall behavior in here. So when you go to set up a thrall, if you want to create something new or modify one of them, this is a good place to start. So next we have the stat modifier template data table, which has for each of the, so you see like the tiered, the different tiers and the fighter tier 1, 2, 3, and 4. You'll see the stat ID and then how much it increases by each tier. So if you want to increase all tier 4 stuff, you know, to instead of 2.5 times to 3 or 4 to make them really super powerful, this is a good way to do it at a gross level and change everything. So next up is the stat template data table, which is very similar, but this is their starting values. So essentially, for each stat ID, you say the base value. And this, if you go to create a new thrall, or if you want to modify an existing thrall, this is where you go to change their tier 1 stats. All right, so then we have our surface to resource table. This is basically a listing of all the surface types, and then the resource would be like the sound. So stone makes a stone sound, wood makes a wood sound, clay doesn't have one, coal doesn't have one, plants go to plant fiber, aloe vera has its own, and so on and so forth. So each, that way you can kind of have different sounds and different resources based on the type of surface. And you can map multiples to the same thing. I think they have some intelligent defaults somewhere else too. I noticed some stuff in, so you'd have to look at that a little more carefully. But another big table here is the thrall data table. These are very important. There's only 3, but if you want to add a new type of thrall, you're probably going to want to add it here. Right now we have entertainer, archer, and attacker. They have some components, and they also have behaviors. So we have this non-aggro, stationary, and then BT attacker, and then we have 3 behavior parameters. So when you go to set up a new thrall, you're going to have to take a look at that. You may be able to use one of the existing ones, which will make your life a little bit easier. But just take note that that data is there and what it's doing. So finally, in my list here, last one we're going to talk about is the UI module table, and this is where we're going to do our quick demo. So this lists all of the UI elements. Essentially, it's a listing of all the GUIs, their common name, the widget class, the then on top of that you have where it shows up and you know what the toggles are to do it, and all that. So let's go through setting up our compass. So I'm going to add a new row. Actually, probably not yet. Let me go out first. Let's add a GUI that we actually want to add. So the very first thing we do is go to our mod folder. I, of course, have opened everything up, so it makes it super hard to get to where I want. All right. So here we have mods. I've called this compass vid. Let me remove my filters. It's very important, otherwise stuff won't show up. So I've prepped a couple of things. I have an image of my compass. I also have a compass needle. Let's see if this is it. Nope, one sec. It is going to be, you know, you never have your stuff where you want it. So I'm going to drop this guy in. I have a, basically it's a coin, a Viking coin that I found online. I'm not planning on releasing this, so I just grabbed any old thing. I believe it's a free image, but that's hard. I usually buy stuff from a reputable source if I'm going to be using it for distribution, but I'm not distributing, so have no fear. I also have the compass needle, so this is just a another PNG, and then that's our two resources. Next up, we're going to need our blueprint class. Now, it's very important. All of the GUI elements to be able to use the UI module table have to be done from the window root, or have to be derived from the window root. So we see in here user widget, root widget, window root. So we're going to derive from that. I'm going to call this W underscore compass. So you'll see that the parent class is Conan sandbox.windowRoot. It is very important, or nothing will work. I think it's expecting some base behavior from that to be able to launch and load it and do some other niceties. So at this point, let's set up our UI. I'm going to pull this down so I can drop my image on here and another image on here, and we're going to throw our two textures in on this guy. So which one's on top? This one's on top. The brush, and then we'll put that guy there, and then we'll do the same thing for this. And now we have our basic image. Let me make this window bigger so I can actually set it up correctly. Very important, if we don't, so right now the anchoring is set to the upper left. We're going to want to set this anchoring to the bottom right for both of these. So go into anchors, select bottom right, anchors, bottom right. That way it goes all the way to the corner, otherwise it will not, and it'll look funny. Let's set this to 100 by 100 and kind of stick it in the corner right about there's good. And then this one, unfortunately my image is a little oblong, so oh man, how do I change my Z order? Yeah, there we go. Okay. So let's line this guy up. Let's stretch it out so it fits, and kind of put this guy in the middle, because what we're going to do is have this be our compass point. So we're essentially going to tie the behavior of the user to this particular compass point. So as the user spins around, so will our compass. This is not meant to be accurate, by the way. This is just for a quick demo. So I think that'll do. Looks like it's in approximately the right spot. So now at this point, we've created our resource. I'm going to compile and save it off. We have our UI. Now we need to actually go down and add it to the UI module table. So we're going to just call this compass. And then the widget class, we're going to pull in the W underscore compass. That's the one we just created. Next up, we only need to tick off on the show in playing state. Show in playing state means, so let's go over each one of these real quick and what they mean. Startup state would be things like the the loading screen. And we can see other examples. So here, the show on startup state would be things like here, the main menu, and you see it kind of shows up in several places, and it's controlled by some other custom behavior. In our case, we just want it to always show when they're playing, but not when they're going to menus. So we're going to say only show in playing state. You can also preload if you have a lot of UI elements on. Let's say you have a list of 10,000 items. Maybe you want to preload the data. That really is up to you. The Z order, I'm going to set it to, I think 3 is a pretty good value. Right now, the other elements that are things like the breathing meter is 0, which is probably not correct. Let's see. The shortcut bar is 3. And the shortcut bar is probably where we want it. So we're going to put it 3, so it'll kind of be sidelong. We may want to put it 4 just in case, or 2, but we'll just leave it as 3 for now. So now we save it, and at this point it should show up. So let's fire up the game. And nope. Of course it doesn't. Let's see what we have going on that's gone wrong. Oh, actually, because... Give me one moment. Okay, so I did a little investigation, and we missed one very important thing. There's auto shown in states. This way we don't have to automatically, or we don't have to tell it to activate. So when we do this, we can say where it's automatically shown, which is playing. That's why it wasn't showing up. So when we save this guy off, now when we go in and hit go, everything should show up. So now we see it down in the bottom right there. It's a little close to the right side. We should probably move it over a little. It's still not tied to our rotation, so we should fix that. By the way, this isn't going to be game accurate. It's just an example, so I'm not going to get into it too far, but we'll do a quick addition to make it rotate. So let's go into this guy first and make it and move it slightly left, so it looks a little bit better. And realistically, it'd be a little nicer if it was bigger, but I'm not going to fiddle with it. Sure, full screened it would look just dandy. Okay, looks pretty good. So at this point, we can go out to let's see. Yep. So for this, we're going to go. All right. So we're going to hop over to Compass. Now, I don't have a really good way to do this right now, so I'm going to throw it on every tick and just update the rotation. It's probably not the best thing in the world. Oh, let me give these slightly better names, these images, so it doesn't look so strange. So the bottom one is going to be our, let's call it our compass base. And then the top, we'll call it our compass needle. Okay, that's slightly better. So at this point, we're going to go in, and I need to first, I think I'm going to grab and try and set the render angle of this guy. So first let's get this guy, and then let's do a set render angle. So just to be clear, what I'm working on is in this guy right now, the angle let's see where you at. Transform, angle. This will let me rotate this guy. So we can apply the angle to it, which is what we're doing here. We're going to say what, which is the needle. And then we need to define the angle here. The angle we're going to get from the rotator, which we need to get from the bass player's character. So first, let's get the owning pawn. So get owner. What is it called? Get owning player pawn. So the get owning player pawn. So this gets our current pawn. Then from there, we need to cast this to our bass player character. Okay, so now we've got this guy. And then we should be able to do a probably going to want to do, this can be pure cast, I think. Yeah, because I don't really need to do anything else with that. I just need the character. From there, I'm going to get the rotation. So get, what's the name of it? Base aim rotation. So that's where we're looking at. And then from this, I need to take this and do a break rotator. So this will give me my 3 pieces of rotation as a float, which is what this guy takes in. So let's move these guys over. And then we're going to get yaw, I think. And this should, every tick, update the rotation angle to match the other one. So that looks pretty good. Yeah, I think this should work. So let's drag it over. C is a quick and easy way to add a comment. Compass needle, which makes life much better later. I think this will work. Let's try compile. Good. If it compiles, then it must be perfect. That's never been true. Okay. And there we go. Wow, look at that. So now it's going to basically update it. This does not ring true with where it's actually pointing. It's going to start at whatever location you're pointing. It's always going to be pointing down or up when it starts. And then it'll just add whatever current rotation you have. You'd have to do some more work to actually get it to point north. But it's good enough for our quick demo. And we're not here for math, more about learning how to mod. So that's it. I hope this video was helpful. It was a little bit rambling, but I wanted to kind of go over all the data tables and give a quick example of how to use one. There's a lot of powerful functionality built inside of those data tables, and understanding them is key to understanding how Conan Exiles works. So I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know in a comment and like down below, and thanks for watching.